Hello, and welcome to the Russian/Communist Revolution notes. Um, if you are watching this, go back and find the regular slideshow and click on this video to watch how Mario is a communist, and it'll give you lots of background information for what you're about to learn. So by the end of this, you need to know what led to the communists taking power. You need to know who is Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin, and there are posters hanging in the classroom to help you with those. Then what is the February Revolution? What is the October Revolution? What is the Great Purge? Those are things that you will learn during this slideshow. So a few things you need to know is what is communism? Hopefully you know what communism is by now. We've talked a lot about it throughout the last 2 years. And a czar is another way of saying Caesar or czar. And these are the rulers of Russia. A Soviet is a person who is a worker. The Duma, you'll come upon all these and I'll explain them again later, is like Congress. It's a representative assembly. Bolsheviks are the same thing as Soviets. They're the name of the Communist Party. Reds are Soviets. They are Bolsheviks. And whites are the loyalists. Again, all of these things will come up later. Just want you to have heard them one time. All right. Again, you'll see posters like this in the classroom. So there's Vladimir Lenin. He'll be a big part of this. And then we have Tsar Nicholas II. He is the ruler of Russia at the beginning of these notes. Then we have Trotsky and Stalin, who will also make big appearances. And again, there are posters hanging around the classroom with these people on them and their information. So to begin our timeline, in 1904, we have Russo-Japanese War. And down here at the bottom, you can see what you're really looking for. Who fought? Why did they fight? Who won? And what is the effect? What is the result? So who is fighting? We can see it at the top. It's got Tsarist Russia versus Japan. In the early 1900s, Japan had industrialized and set its sights on creating its own empire, just like the Europeans. Remember the new imperialism unit. Why they fought? Well, Japan invaded China, Korea, and the Sakhalin Islands. Japan took control of China and the Korean Peninsula. The Russians said, you need to leave. This isn't okay for you to do. So Japan said, no, and we'll go to war with you. Japan won and not only keeps that part of China and keeps the Korean Peninsula, but it also took control of the Sakhalin Islands, taking them away from the Russians. The effect or the result is that, oh my gosh, remember how we learned about social Darwinism, the idea, the pseudoscience that had proven that white Europeans were the most advanced humans? Well, the biggest effect was that Russia's loss to the Japanese was embarrassing, as it contradicted their belief about being superior to other races. So again, make sure you pause here, go to your timeline, include who fought, why they fought, who won, and what was the effect. Our next event on the timeline is the 1905 revolution. This time, who fought is the Russian people versus the Tsarists' royal army. So shortly after the loss against the Japanese, 1 year before, Russia faced internal problems. Workers were unhappy with how long their workdays lasted. Much like the harsh conditions you faced during our Industrial Revolution factory simulation, these workers were feeling mistreated and undervalued. The workers staged a peaceful protest to seek a limit to their workday. They wanted to work 8 hours only. Well, like I said, the protest was peaceful at first. But as things started to get a little heated, the Tsar's troops opened fire on the peaceful protesters. This became known as Bloody Sunday, and it encouraged many other Russians to join in the protesting. Even though the Tsar had won, his army had finished or ended the protest by killing those protesters, the ultimate result was that he lost some of his power. So the Duma was created. And again, the Duma is a representative government. I want you to think something similar to British Parliament or the American Congress. People are elected to help make rules. So at this point, go back or pause, go to your timeline, include who fought, why did they fight, who won, and what is the effect or what was the result. Our next event on the timeline is World War I. So you're going to enter this into your timeline. There's not much to put. Just use the title, unless you forgot your World War I info from our last unit. If you forgot that, make sure you add in why Russia joined the war and which side Russia was on. And so remember, Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated. Nationalism and alliances led Russia to enter the war to protect Serbia. Again, these are things we just studied, and hopefully you remember. So place it on your timeline because it is important. It'll affect the Russian Revolution. All right, and that takes us to our next one. This is the February or March Revolution, and this is weird. It was February in Russia, but it was March in the rest of the world. They were using a different calendar. It was about 12 days off. So, um, so who fought? We have regular Russians versus the Tsar again. So many regular Russians were unhappy with World War One. Also, the Tsar had given lip service to the Duma, meaning even though the Duma was supposed to have some power, the Tsar wasn't really listening to them. And in World War One, Russia was facing the largest amount of casualties. If you look at this list over here of the number of people dying or being wounded, this one down at the bottom is Russia. The only one that fared worse was Austria-Hungary. So the people in Russia are not happy about what's going on in World War One. So regular Russians revolt against the Tsar. And specifically, we're talking about the Communist Party is leading this. These are the communists, these are the Bolsheviks, these are the Reds. It's all the same people. They have different names, the colors. The red is the color. The communist is what they want. The Bolsheviks is what they call themselves. It's all the same people. I'll continue to refer to them as Bolsheviks, Reds, communists. They're the same. So the Duma, after this, takes complete power from the Tsar. We have a full representative government. Things are moving in the right direction. However, the Duma is made up mostly of rich Russians, and they have the full powers of the Duma members. And the Bolsheviks, the regular Russians, the communists, the Reds, they're just advisors. They have no real power. So if at this point, I want you to go back and look at who fought Tsarist Russia versus its own people. Why did they fight? Well, the Tsar wasn't really listening to his people. Who won? It wasn't the Tsar. And who has power? Break it down. The Duma has it, but it's mostly the rich. All right. So this takes us just a few months into the future, and we have the November Revolution. Again, it was October in Russia and November in the rest of the world. Sorry for the confusing title. So we're looking for who fought. Why did they fight? Who won? And what was the effect? What was the result? So the Duma is unpopular. The rich people are still in charge. The Duma was using the military to control what the regular Russians could do. And worse yet, they kept Russia in World War I, even though Russia was still facing giant losses in people. So the Bolsheviks, the Soviets, the communists, the Reds, they're the same people. They have different names again. They revolt against the Duma, and in a bloodless revolution, the communists take control. The Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, this man over here, he wins the revolution. This October Revolution becomes known as the Communist Revolution. Lenin takes power and institutes some reforms. Russia is getting out of World War I. He outlaws all political parties except for Bolsheviks. The Duma is disbanded. And he fosters violence. He says, hey, if people aren't going to listen to us, then we are going to make them listen to us. And there's lots of propaganda about anybody that is not pro-communist, pro-Lenin. This is going to lead to our next event, which is the Civil War. So who fought? In this case, fought is in quotes, because like you said, it's a bloodless revolution. Why were they fighting? Well, it's the same as we've seen so far, was over politics. Who had power? Who had won? This is the communist revolution, so the communists must have won. And the effect is that, one, we are going to see a new Russia, and two, the Civil War, which is next. Before we get to the Civil War in 1918, like it said on the last slide, as Lenin comes into power, he takes Russia out of World War I. So in this case, you don't need to write anything down other than just use the title of this slide for your timeline entry and briefly explain why Russia exited World War I early. Again, this has to do with how much losses the Russians were facing and the fact that the communists came into power. All right. That takes us to the Russian Civil War. And here we can see a picture of reds versus whites. Red is the color of communism. So we have the Reds, the Bolsheviks, the communists versus the whites. And that is the people who are supporting the Tsar. So Lenin's new government is not popular with everyone. And so we have this civil war where we have Lenin's Reds versus the whites, the loyalists to the Tsar. And this includes people like the United States and Great Britain, who didn't want to see communism taking control of any country, especially a European country. So they sent advisors and advisors and money and supplies to the whites to fight against the Reds. Well, I don't know if you're surprised. Hopefully, you knew that Russia became communist and stayed that way for a very long time, but the Russians won this civil war. And when we look at who fought, we can see in the picture, we can see why they're fighting. Obviously, the communists win. Skip the result for now, the effect, because the result is what we see on this slide. Russia is no more. The USSR is created. So, with the USSR, no one's fighting in this one. We're really just looking at Tsarist Russia is over. It is now known as the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, Communist Russia. This includes the country of Russia, the big red one here, and many smaller countries that bordered or were near Russia, including Ukraine, which is still being fought over today, Latvia, Estonia, all the stands, including Kazakhstan, and more. These were all part of the USSR. Lenin and the communists started to redistribute wealth and in classes. So this is supposed to be a utopia for workers. Get rid of classes, no rich, no poor, everyone is equal. In order to do that, you have to take money from the rich and redistribute it. This is the first step in worldwide communism. The goal was for eventually all workers would unite and end capitalism and all types of government. Everybody would be like Russia. Well, in 1924, Vladimir Lenin dies. He had been sick for quite a while. He had suffered several strokes. He lost the ability to speak. And if you look at the poster for Stalin, you'll see that he was super sneaky. The entire time Lenin was in power, Stalin was behind the scenes, gaining supporters, but doing it in a very subtle way. And so as Lenin loses the ability to speak, Stalin lies about what Lenin says. He lies about what Trotsky says and lies about what Trotsky wants and does. Trotsky is forced to flee Russia, and then very shortly thereafter, he dies mysteriously. It's not a mystery. Stalin had him murdered. So our result is that Stalin consolidates power, and our next event will end our timeline. But again, use the title of the slide, 1924, Lenin dies, and just really make sure that you understand that as Lenin dies, it creates a power vacuum, a vacuum that is replaced with the Stalinator, Stalin and the Great Purge. So Joseph Stalin murders Trotsky, industrializes Russia, and then continues to murder anyone and everyone that is not 100% pro-Stalin, and who was pro-Stalin one day might not be considered pro-Stalin the next day. And so he realizes that to keep his power, he's going to have to murder them. But that causes a problem because the people he murdered, their friends and family are upset. So he has them murdered. And in some cases, entire villages or towns are just completely wiped off the face of the planet, all in order to keep Stalin in power. A lot of people are also sent to prison camps to work, horrible, horrible conditions, and this results in a totalitarian state. Stalin is basically the king of Russia. He has total control. Things happen with what he says and no other way. He and his friends get rich. Everyone else suffers. Is this communism? No. It's a totalitarian state. And from then on, communism is going to look very different than it was supposed to look like under Vladimir Lenin. So our summary for our timeline this time is: how did Stalin take power? And what was life like in Stalin's USSR? All right, at this point, you should be able to look at your timeline and see that it is completely filled in. If you need to, go back, rewind, or raise your hand and ask for help.